Amazingly, actually, the first time I saw Prabhupada was on television, which you might think would sort of distance him somewhat, but I really felt his presence. I had no idea who it was. He came on this late night program. This is back in 1969. It was just 4 days, I later learned, after he arrived in the country. They were staying at John Lennon's house, and Mukunda had managed to organise this interview. So late in the evening, I used to sit every day in the evening if I was around with my father. I was staying with him at the time. And there would be famous people like politicians, playwrights, authors, that kind of a person, would be submitted to an interview by a fairly assertive presenter. Yeah. So suddenly, in the chair, this is sort of 10:30 at night, was this elderly Indian monk. I thought, wow, what an amazing looking person. Who can that possibly be? And Tony Bilbo, the presenter, he began to question this man. He said, I recall it pretty well, somehow it stuck in my mind. He said, what's brought you here to this country? And this elderly man said, I've come to teach about God, straight off the bat. And immediately I thought, that's interesting, because I had been taught about God all my life, you know, by monks. And they had assured me that I didn't need to hear about God from anyone else. You know, these were Catholic monks and they could tell me everything I needed to know. So I thought, this is going to be interesting. I wonder what he's going to say. So the interviewer said to him, is this the same God that we already know about in this country, you know, or is it some other God? And this man, this elderly, wise Indian man, he said, it's the same God that I'm come to speak of. God has many names, but God is one. So I was intrigued. And then the elderly man said, I think he said, the interviewer probably asked him next, so what are you teaching? And this elderly Indian man said, I am teaching how you can see God and speak with God, just as I am speaking with you, face to face. And I thought, that sounded amazing. And then the next question was, so what is it, what's your method? How can we do this? So then the elderly Indian man said, you simply sing the names of God. And I thought, it can't be that simple, you know. And my father was sitting next to me, and I said to him, "What did he say? Did he say you just sing?" And my father said, "I don't know. I couldn't," because his accent was very strong. So I was intrigued, and then the interviewer said, "Well, would you like to demonstrate?" At which, until that time, this saintly man had looked very serious, grave, you know, and suddenly his face just lit up with this huge smile and his sparkling energy, which really captured me. And he said, "I would love to." And so they got up and walked across the studio, where there were some devotees, and they were sitting on the floor. And this monk sat on the floor with them. And in retrospect, I realised I don't think I've ever seen anyone sit on a television studio floor, before or since. So they sat on the floor, and the man went. He interviewed at least one of them, and I do remember very clearly it was Shamsundar. He had that tilak that went from here all the way to there, you know, with a shiny shaven pate. And I thought to myself, gosh, I admire that young man, a bit older than me, but I admire that man. And these people, I can see they've got something really special. And the thought that occurred to me was, I could never do what they're doing. I could tell it was really serious, but I would love to aspire to something like that. So then they began to sing. And, you know, Prabhupada had his kartals, and Shamsundar had his Esiraj, and Yamuna probably was the one that was singing, I don't recall, you have the harmonium, and Mukunda had his tambura and the mridanga. It was such a beautiful sound. So they chanted one round of the Mahamantra. As soon as I heard the sound, I thought, that is right. You just have to sing. It all made perfect sense. It just connected completely with me. And I was ready to sit there for hours listening, but immediately the program ended. You know, the credits started to scroll down, and it faded out. And I turned to my father and I said, wasn't that amazing? And my father said, no. So I learned from that. Well, I mean, I learned this amazing presence which Prabhupada was able to project, you know, across a screen. I didn't know if I would ever meet him again. I don't remember what my thoughts were on that subject, but I did think I would like to be like that young man that was questioned. And I formed some kind of an appreciation of the chanting. And of course, a few weeks later, within a week or two from then, it was in the charts, you know, the Hare Krishna mantra was being sung on the radio all the time. Yeah. So that was my first encounter with Prabhupada. The main impression I had of course, I didn't know he was Prabhupada, but the main impression I had of this man was that he was 100% genuine. He really knew what he was, when he was speaking about God, I knew I've got to hear what this man says.
I wasn't very lucid when I first met Srila Prabhupada. And I was at Berry Place by the grace of Shamsundar Prabhu, who I saw on the street. And then Prabhupada was just about to leave for Nairobi. And on the way to the airport with the devotees to see Prabhupada off, I suddenly realized that I might never see this person again, and hadn't really been able to take in who Srila Prabhupada was. So then when he came back some months later from Nairobi, I did write a letter to him because I was so afraid I wouldn't see him again. And he wrote me a beautiful letter back. And so when he came back, then I really could see him more properly. It's funny to look back on, knowing myself the way I do. The Prabhupada was very kind to me, and he said, he thanked me for the letter, because I had written it very, very carefully. I'd written every letter separately, like it was a work of art or something. And Prabhupada commented that it was nicely written and correctly spelled. And he said that showed that I was a very intelligent girl and should use my talent and intelligence in serving Krishna, which now seems such didn't fit with what I thought of myself. But Prabhupada, he just tried to draw something out of everybody, and it was encouraging, and it's still encouraging to think, oh, I hope I can do something for him, And then he went on to say that young boys and girls are often disturbed in mind, but if they just chant Hare Krishna, then the waves of material nature will be overcome. It was full of really relevant things. You know, somehow Prabhupada always hit the nail on the head, no matter who you were, and even I hadn't even spoken to him before.
My plan, this had been my plan for some time, because I had come to Canada seeking spiritual enlightenment, because it was on the cards. Friends had gone to India, I didn't go with them. And a friend of my mother's, who was a famous spiritualist, had read my tea leaves and said, "You're going to meet your spiritual teacher very shortly." And her daughter knew somebody called Lobsang Rampa, who was famous for writing various books, and he was supposedly a Tibetan monk. And anyway, at that point he was living in Montreal. So then I ended up in Montreal, and the daughter worked there in the Bank of Montreal, and she had got arrangements being made for me to meet Lobsang Rampa. So on that weekend that I was supposed to meet him, that was the weekend the devotees invited me to Boston. So I took the option to go with them instead. But nonetheless, for the seriousness of the occasion, I thought it wise to establish myself in a higher state of consciousness. So I nipped into the toilet and took some LSD. And so when I came before Prabhupada in his room, I was on my way up, and Prabhupada asked me various questions about what was my level of education in Britain. I said I'd come very recently from Britain. And we were talking about these things. I thought this was a level of questioning. I didn't feel that my mundane education had any bearing on these things. I didn't really understand that Prabhupada was seeing how he could engage me in Krishna's service. In fact, I'd done 4 years of acting training, and he could well have engaged me in that way, but it never came out. I never volunteered this. I was, in the meantime, becoming very absorbed by Prabhupada's mahogany color and the lines on his face, because I was perceiving things in an enhanced optical manner. And Prabhupada said, "This is very nice that you've come to see the spiritual master, but it's more important that you should hear from him." So this was my first kind of jolt that this was actually not getting me anywhere, this enhanced state I was in, and that it would require further patient understanding of the instructions and the writings and things like this. So this was a 20-minute, half an hour darshan. Jadharani was there, and she wanted to reach a painting which was Prabhupada had his back to. He was leaning on this wall, and the painting was above his head, and she said, "Prabhupada, I'm nervous, I don't want to disturb you, but I need that painting, I've got to make some corrections to him." And he said, "You can stand on my head if you're reaching a picture of Krishna." Then on my way out, somebody had just called in and said, "Prabhupada, a dog has defecated in the hallway." I think they were student lodgings or something like that, where Prabhupada had his little apartment and suite of rooms. So on my way out, Prabhupada said to me, "Will you arrange for that to be dealt with? And see the janitor and sort that out." So that was my first service, was to sort out the dog mess. In Chinese astrology, I am a fire dog.
I was asked if I wanted to get initiated, and the letter of recommendation was sent, and I was waiting, for it to come back, and I was thinking, I wish I could have a name, something to do with Vrindavan. And I've heard quite a few devotees talking about their name and how you know, a magical thing happened. So I'm thinking, wow, you know, but Yamuna, the name Yamuna has gone since a long time, and what else is there for women, for girls, you know, what else is there for girls, you know, in Vrindavan? I didn't even know like what places there were in Vrindavan or anything. And I think that my temple president, which was Petit Udaran, I think I heard from him later on that he had recommended me a name for me, or she suggested a name for me. Or he was thinking of one, which would be Jaya Rukmini, because I was newly married as well, you see. And I thought, oh, gosh, I really wish I could have a name. Too bad I won't be able to get a name from Vrindavan. And then the letter came, and he said that my name was Govardhan Dasi. I could not believe that. I could not believe that. And, you know, even today, I'm so thrilled to have that name. So thrilled. Yeah, so that was very special for me, that I wanted something and I received it, which just shows that, you know, Krishna does say here and there in the scriptures that it's his pleasure, eternal pleasure, to fulfill the desires of his devotees, and Prabhupada was, you know, directly with him, and whoever chose the names, whether it was his servant or whoever it was a miracle, honestly.
Prabhupada came to England for the second time. He returned to England in the summer of '71. So I was at the airport, you know, and the impression was overwhelming because he shone. You know, he had a brilliant aura, sort of a golden. It's a mystical thing, isn't it? But there was a golden light that just shone, and yet physically he was small, and yet he was the most powerful presence in the whole airport, you know. And he just drifted. He didn't seem to walk. He seemed. That's how my memory is, like he just floated through. Yeah. So it created a very powerful impression of being, I would say, just being blessed. Being blessed. By that time I had been in the temple for 9 months, so I had read and heard so much about Prabhupada. I think it's worth saying that, you know, when I joined the temple, devotees like Yamuna, Mukunda, Shamsundar, Gurudas, Malati, they were talking about Prabhupada all the time. They were totally in love with him. So although I hadn't met him I didn't get to meet him until 9 months later, I had already imbibed a deep sense of love. And always his tapes were playing. Yeah.
My first service was buying flowers for the deities, and it's still my favourite service. And when Prabhupada was coming, I made a banner with flowers on it, hanging out outside the building saying, Jai Srila Prabhupada. And he stepped out of the vehicle and he looked up and saw it, and I just felt immediately that loving connection and reciprocation immediately. And I had not, you know, all I'd done was pay my obeisances to him. I still hadn't had any personal association, but it is personal. Even if you're not speaking. I know so many devotees that never met Srila Prabhupada, and they still have an intensely personal relationship.
So then after Ishtagosti, I asked Satsvarup Maharaj, should I be initiated? I would like to be. Would Prabhupada accept me? We have to go back to Montreal at short notice tomorrow morning. Is there any chance? And he said, let's go and ask him. So we went to Prabhupada's apartment door. Devananda met us at the door. He said, wait, and he went in, and then he came back fairly shortly and said, it's not possible for Prabhupada. He's going to his shower, but he will accept you. Just send your beads to him from Montreal. So a few weeks later, in those days, interestingly, we made our own beads up, and so we got them from a craft shop, and that was an interesting thing, to actually tie the knots and actually complete your beads and then send it off. It was an interesting crafted thing that you were offering Prabhupada, and then he would sanctify it. So a few weeks later, I think it was the very beginning of June, I got my beads back. And that was after we had the John Lennon, Yoko Ono bed-in for peace. So this is my initiation letter sent from New Vrindavan on May the 28th, 1969. My dear Sripati Das, please accept my blessings. I thank you very much for your letter dated May the 18th, 1969, sent along with your prayer beads, and I have duly chanted upon them and initiated you as my disciple. Your spiritual name, Sripati Das, with a footnote, handwritten by Srila Prabhupada, Sripati equals the husband of the goddess of fortune. This means the servant, you're the servant of Lord Narayan or Krishna. If you will simply continue to develop your Krishna consciousness as you have been doing, then surely you will be an expert servant of Lord Krishna. Our process is to faithfully follow the rules of no illicit sex life, no non-vegetarian diet, no intoxication, and no gambling activities. Also, we must chant at least 16 rounds each day, trying to avoid the 10 kinds of offences. You have very nice association with your nice godbrothers in Montreal Temple, and you should help them to propagate Krishna consciousness in that area. So please consult with Hansadutta, and there will be ample engagement for you in this connection. If any questions or difficulties arise, you may consult with older devotees there, or if you like, I am always at your service to help you in any way that I can. So now you have great opportunity to make perfection of your life, and please always be serious about this. Then Krishna will surely give you all facilities for nice advancement. I hope this will meet you in very good health. Your ever well-wisher, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The reason I wanted to become initiated was I could feel the seriousness of Srila Prabhupada. He didn't seem like a sensationalist guru. I had that opportunity to go to see Lobsang Rampa, and I'd been familiar with his persona through his writings, and Prabhupada seemed of a different order. And also, I think the devotees surrounding Prabhupada, his students who were in place already, were very much a deciding factor. I could see that this was a movement. He was the head of it. I knew I had a lot to learn about him, but by that one meeting I was sufficiently impressed to feel that yes, let me go on with this exposure and try this out. I can always change my mind, I thought.
Well, it was, I think, July of 1973, and I was getting the Gayatri mantra, second initiation. And I was getting it from Prabhupada himself, and we were all waiting outside the door, and one by one we would go in. So then one of the men came back, or boys came back, and it was like, oh, Prabhupada said I had long nails. So we were trying to sort our nails out, you know. It was my turn to go in. And I bowed down at the entrance of the room. And it seemed like a very, very big room at that time. You know, when you grow up and you go back to your old childhood places and they're just not as big as you imagined. To me, it seemed like a huge room. And Prabhupada was quite a long way away. So I bowed down just by the door. It's all white dust sheets. And I'm saying, Nama Om Vishnu Padaya, Krishna Prastaya Bhutale. And because even then, I loved languages, you see. And at school, my favorite subjects were languages. And I just come from school 6 months before. And I knew the word for word meaning of those words, right? So I'm saying it and I'm smiling, so I'm like in the presence of Prabhupada and saying it, you know. And you know when someone's smiling, you can hear that in their voice, can't you? So I was doing this and I was really, really happy, but nervous. And I looked up and Prabhupada had the biggest smile on his face. And I wasn't expecting anything, you know. I just looked up and there he was, really smiling. And then he patted the floor next to him because he was on this cushion, but it's not as big as the cushion that he's sitting on now. It was just like a thin thing. Sitting, you know, close to the floor, and he was smiling at me so beautifully, and he was patting the floor like this. Like, come and sit down. And I just couldn't believe that. I couldn't believe it. So I start walking towards him. It's like, I wish that walk would never have ended, you know, because he was pleased. And in retrospect, just thinking about that particular incident, you know, recently, I was thinking, it was really nice that there was something about me that Prabhupada could affirm or, you know, celebrate or appreciate or be pleased by. Because I didn't feel myself to be, you know, like a normal devotee woman, because I was very young and I'm not a cook still now. Cooking frightens me. I didn't really have anything to offer. And the fact that he was pleased by that somehow, you know, that was very wonderful. And then I sat down and we had a piece of paper which was with the Gayatri mantras on it. And it was a little piece of paper like a slip from a typed copy. And I don't think photocopying machines existed at that time. So they were done by typing with a manual typewriter. And so you had the carbon paper in between each copy. And mine must have been the 4th or 5th copy. It was very pale. So Prabhupada took this, and he was still very jolly. He took it from me. He said, "It requires transcendental eyes." It's like my life hangs on those words. First of all, I thought, wow, he's made a joke. You know, first of all, he smiles. He's making a joke, and I thought I must remember the words, because I was just so frightened and so excited and so kind of like young, and there was nobody else there, you know, so I thought I have to remember those words, and you know, 45 years later I can still recite them. It requires transcendental eyes. So I've taken that, you know, through life. You know, the older I get, the more importance it has to me. Like later on, I would have a service of drama, doing drama and stuff. Lots of time with children. And it was like trying to transfer the transcendental emotions that I'd read about, the pastimes or whatever it was that I'd read about in Prabhupada's books, trying to bring them into a concrete reality, you know, using the devotee children as instruments or as material, if you like a potter uses clay. Except that they were alive. And, you know, that was a kind of an important meditation, the transcendental eyes, you know, the trying to sort of bring everything in, you know, create transmit transcendence or something. And also, like, when things are difficult, you know, try to see there's a purpose behind it, try and get back into that consciousness of, like, when we came back from the airport with no shoes. These things are relatively unimportant, no matter how painful they might be, you know, at the time in this limited sphere that we seem to live our lives in, or that I live my life in. They're not all that important, actually, so the transcendental eyes. And also, for example, I use it now in Harinam because I like to do Harinam, and that's what I mostly do in terms of service, apart from deity worship at home. And, you know, you don't always get a positive response or a response from people, you know, that they don't understand what they're hearing and getting. So I just try to remember that, you know, this is not an ordinary thing, it's not an ordinary movement, it's not an ordinary sound, it's the order of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and it's the only thing that counts in our lives and the lives of people that are hearing the mantra, because it's something to extract us and them, you know, from the material world. So those words have carried me through life, basically, and I'm so grateful that I got that little bit of personal association with Prabhupada, because it really has meant the world to me. Anyway, I sat down and he said that joke, and then we did the, you know, the learning to count and the mantra and everything. That passed without event. And Prabhupada was very grave at that point. You know, Prabhupada went from somebody who was just being so emotional and loving to me to a very grave personality. And that was very instructive too, because the spiritual master might love you, but he also has to teach you. He's not an ordinary person. And then I said, you know, thank you, Srila Prabhupada. I did my basis and I went. So that was that.
Prabhupada heard news, apparently, from India that Tamal or Jayapataka had acquired that strip of land that Prabhupada was pushing them to get in Mayapur. He had just bought the land. They'd signed a contract for the land. And so somehow or another, Shamsundar, or I don't know quite how, but anyway, word had reached Prabhupada that I knew something about architecture. So I was called to Prabhupada's room. It was Shamsundar. Introduced me to Prabhupada. I already had my name, Ranchor. I'd had it for sort of 6 months by then. And Prabhupada said, oh, where are you from? Where were you born? So I said, well, north of England, Prabhupada. He said, oh, Scotland? I said, no. Like Yorkshire, you know. But Prabhupada immediately wanted to get to know me. I was too young, I guess, to appreciate the significance of that, but I thought it was very personal, you know. He wanted to have an interaction with me. And then began several days of talks and discussions in Prabhupada's room about what he wanted in Mayapur. He began describing, you know, he wanted this big temple. First of all, he wanted some residential blocks. That was the first thing that needed to be built where devotees could live. And he gave, you know, quite detailed instructions what he wanted. And then he said 4 of those, and then a big temple. So for the next couple of weeks, I was making drawings.
Very small things that stand out in my memory from Bhaktivedanta Manor. We had Gornitai, and sometimes I'd be dressing them and then get a chance to go on the morning walk, or maybe see Prabhupada on his way back from the morning walk. And, you know, we all heard that Prabhupada liked yellow roses. Somehow I found a yellow rose in the garden, and I carried it. I remember carrying it, you know. Anything you did for Prabhupada, you became more conscious, so you're carrying that by its stem as if it's a precious jewel, you know, that you're going to give to the most important person you've ever met. And and I went out and I met the walk coming back over the fields in Lechmore Heath, and I gave the rose to Srila Prabhupada. And I remember he was still holding it. I remember seeing how he was holding it all the way back to the manor. And it was so, you felt like he treasured the little thing that you gave to him. Just such a small thing. But the way he carried it also was as if it was something special that you'd given him. And then another thing that was really was a really sensual experience was my first time I had some Mahaprasadam from Srila Prabhupada. And, you know, you don't really have any preconceived ideas about it. You're completely innocent, a blank slate. And then I was given this piece of orange, and it really felt like something very, very special. And it was as if my whole mouth was tingling with this explosive experience of having the Mahaprasadam from Srila Prabhupada. And that was quite something. You know, those first experiences, and then afterwards you can get a little blasé, or you've had Mahaprasadam before, you know, and you just kind of want to have the taste of what it was. But that was something else. I guess it's because you're reverential and you know, you just want to have the Maha from Prabhupada's lips.
So there is a famous photo of the bed-in for peace with John Lennon, Yoko Ono, and the devotees in the Montreal hotel. And approximately 9 months after that photo was taken, I was the only one left in Montreal. The others had gone their ways. Hansadutta and quite a few of the devotees had gone to help in Vancouver. Bharadraj and Rukmini had gone to help with the art in Boston. And so therefore, inevitably, I became the president, with Jayapataka's training, and then Jayapataka went. So as president, I received, in those days we used to send reports ourselves before the GBC was formed, or it was just forming, but we used to send reports to Prabhupada, so I did 2 or 3 of these and received a letter back from Prabhupada. And Prabhupada had received a letter from someone who was in our temple. He was actually more or less a lodger. I think he was a barber, and he was lodging at the temple, but he was chanting some rounds. And he had suggested to Srila Prabhupada, because he was from Chile and he'd been in the Navy or something, and he became very enthusiastic and said to Prabhupada, we should have frigates full of sailors to go around the world, and they will demand people at gunpoint to chant Hare Krishna, and this is the way we should be doing this. So Prabhupada had replied to him in this letter to me that this is a very nice idea that you've had to have naval ships to spread this Krishna consciousness. But we will not be requiring rifles. We already have our kartals. This will be our weapon. And the chanting and the mridanga will cause explosions to those people around the world.
It was in the old temple room, which was where the theatre is now, and the Vyasa-san was towards the back, and the devotees were all there, and I just thought I would start dancing. But I think I was maybe not, I don't know, I wasn't really dancing because of ecstasy and being transported. I was just trying to join in, you know, and I was quite close to Prabhupada, and he just looked at me. He just looked right through me. He just looked at me, and he just could see everything. And I was still trying to sort of like look happy and join in. And he kept on looking, and I just thought, I want to show Prabhupada that I am sincere, that I want to be a devotee, that you know. But he just looked and looked and looked, and he could see what a specimen he had picked up, you know. He could see what a specimen he'd picked up, and he didn't, how can I put it, you know, it's like he saw all of it, and I think I was doing something, I was doing something wrong. I must not have been keeping the etiquette or something or other, and he was not happy. And then I just had to look away, because I thought, first of all, I kept on looking, thinking, well, I don't want to not meet his glance. I didn't know what the etiquette was or anything. And anyway, then I had to look away. And then he just, when I looked back at him, he'd looked away, and it was like I didn't exist. So it was kind of like, it was a very humbling and shocking experience. But it wasn't nasty, you know. We knew that Prabhupada loved us. I mean, the thing is, he gave up. He invested his whole life. You know, he brought such a treasure, and he had to not just plant it and go. He had to be with us all the time and cope with and deal with all the things that were going on, and translate his books in the night time and travel around at his age. And I know a little bit. I'm not the age that he was when he left India yet, but it's bad enough, and it's just inconceivable how he could have done what he did. So it's not that he didn't love us, but sometimes he was, as I said before, you know, he was the guru. He wasn't there just to mess around and make friends. You know, he had a message, and he had a process that had to be followed if he wanted to get success.
Prabhupada wanted a very large temple. Now, around this time, our godbrother Narayan arrived from America. He had somehow been, you know, added to the team that was going to go with Prabhupada to India, because he was a construction man. So I was told to work with him, and that was, shall we say, it was an interesting experience. But I'm not here to talk about that. However, Narayan took charge of me. And I remember once, I mean, we were working hard, long, long hours, late into the night, to try to get everything ready for Prabhupada, because time was up. He wanted a finished set of drawings to take with him, you know, to India. So on one occasion, Narayan said, come on, let's go down to see Prabhupada. It was in the morning after breakfast, and so in we went. And Narayan said, he's tired, Prabhupada. He's tired, which I was. So then Prabhupada said, oh? And he looked at me, he said, are you tired? I said, no, Prabhupada. So then Prabhupada turned to Narayana and he said, you are tired. Atmanam manyate jagat. You know, what's in your mind, you're thinking, what you're feeling, you're thinking he's feeling. He's not tired. So I was working flat out to make these drawings. And on one occasion, because I had got behind on my rounds, come late in the evening, I stood out, I had all these rounds to chant. So I quietly let myself out the front door and off I went into the night with my beads. And it was one of those things where I was so tired I was walking, you know, into lampposts. I don't know if you ever had that experience. And I was walking around the streets in central London and everything was quiet. In those days, London was asleep. I got back to the street where the temple is, right in front of the British Museum, Bury Place, at about 1 in the morning. And everything was quiet. But when I turned into the street, I heard, from the end of the street, I could hear Prabhupada's voice. And I saw that his lights were on. He occupied the room on the first floor above the temple room. And his windows looked out onto the main street. All his lights were on, bright, shining into the night. And his window was open. And I could hear his voice. And I realized he's dictating into, you know, he's translating the Bhagavatam, commenting on the Bhagavatam. So immediately I felt nervous, actually. Immediately I felt nervous because I didn't want him to know that I was out late at night, you know. So I sort of tiptoed to the front door, which was open. We never locked it in those days. And I tried to be as quiet as I could going up the stairs. Had to go past his landing and the stairs were creaking. I thought, God, I really don't want him to know. But when I got outside his door, I had to just sit there and listen. So I sat outside his door and the whole building, you know, you could hear the heavy breathing, occasional kind of snoring, and so everyone was asleep. And Prabhupada was saying a few words and there was a click. And a few more words and a click. A few more words and so on. Sometimes a long pause and then a lot of words. And I had this amazing realization that when everyone else was asleep, he was awake and he was speaking not just to the dictaphone, it really felt like he was speaking, you know, to the world. I'm sure that's what he felt as well, actually. He was speaking to the world.
So then in LA, I had my second initiation from Prabhupada. There were just two of us brahmacharis who were initiated, one on either side of Srila Prabhupada's Vyasasan in the old temple room. And we heard the mantra from Prabhupada and were initiated. Later in the day, I went up to Prabhupada's room and from my perspective, coming from Canada, I was hot, you know, in LA. So in those days, in summer heat, we sometimes would dress in, what's the name of that when it's crossed across here, the cloth? It's got a particular name, but I think probably sannyasis have it only these days, but quite often we would wear just that, you know, without the kurta. So I was sitting there in the window seat with the window open and having darshan, listening to Prabhupada. Govinda Dasi was there. And she had a new sweater for Prabhupada. She had knitted, wool sweater, which she presented to Prabhupada. And Prabhupada changed right there on the spot, sitting behind his table. And then the conversation went on, and Prabhupada was, then Prabhupada looked at me and said, are you cold? And I didn't pick up on this straight away, but he was playing with me, and And I said, no, Prabhupada, I'm fine. I'm from Canada, I was thinking, you know. This is fine for me. But I didn't get it straight away. But he said, are you sure? He gave me a second chance. And I said, oh, yes, now I am cold. So I received Prabhupada's old ex-jumper sweater and treasured it very dearly, took it back with me to Montreal and would wear it on special occasions, which was turned into wearing it on Sankirtan. And inevitably we did have a hot day here and there in Montreal, and sitting there in Phillips Square chanting with the devotees got quite hot sometimes. I took the jumper off and laid it down near me, and some greedy devotee swiped it from me. And search as I could, I never got it back. But then I thought to myself, well, I was there in LA representing the Montreal Yatra, so one of us had it.
Some of the interesting wishes Prabhupada had, you know, for Mayapur, it was mainly to do with the construction, because that's what I was helping with. He did want the temple very big. I know, you know, the temple that has been built there is colossal. Kind of difficult for me. I like things to be, you know, human scale. But Prabhupada wanted it. I have no doubt about that. He wanted something colossal. We used to go during this period with Prabhupada every morning around Russell Square, which was a nearby square where he liked to walk. One morning I was sitting in the temple room chanting my japa, and Shamsundar stuck his head in the door and said, does anyone want to come? Oh, well, you know, he said to me, come and walk with Prabhupada, you know, we want you to be there because I'm part of the team. And so I dashed out onto the front doorstep, and there was Prabhupada with Shamsundar and Pradyumna mainly, and one or two others. And I had this very thin kurta that had been donated, you know, by a Hindu. It was like see-through. And Prabhupada said, you will be cold. It was 6 o'clock in the morning. I said, no, Prabhupada, I'm not cold. and he said, put on something warmer. And I hesitated because I thought, no, then he'll leave without me. And then Prabhupada said, that's all right. We'll wait. So I ran up, put on something else and came down, and off we went to the square. So while we were walking around the square, Prabhupada wanted to talk, and Narayan was also one of the team. He wanted to talk about his plans. And he, over a period of several days, these conversations went on. And I remember one day, he pointed to one of the buildings around the square. He said, how tall is that building? So everyone looked at me because I'm the one that's supposed to know. And so I said, well, it's about 50 feet. So Prabhupada said, higher than that. And so next day, there's one large hotel on Russell Square called Russell Hotel. And it's the tallest building. And Prabhupada pointed out, he said, how tall is that? I said, Prabhupada is about 80 feet tall. It was 8 stories. And Prabhupada said, higher than that. And then we carried on walking around. Then he turned around, and especially to Narayan, I think he said this, it should be 3 times as high as that. So, yeah, Prabhupada wanted a very, very tall building. In the end, it was like he wanted it over 300 feet. That's how we ended up, yeah. And he also said some interesting things. He said, because it's a floodplain, you know, you have to leave the first floor. The ground level should just be for storage because that will flood. All the buildings should be like that. You know, the very first Mayapur, what we called the temple, Mayapur Chandradoya Mandir, which was the original residential block. It was not built as a temple, it was built as a residential block, and the ground floor was just open for storage. And that's where Radha and Krishna were installed, there on the ground floor. That was our temple. It was never intended to be anything. So anyhow, Prabhupada said also, we will need a raft foundation. I'd never really heard of such a thing. But the next day, an engineer who happened to be Indian, but he was a very highly qualified professional structural engineer, came and spent a couple of hours with Prabhupada. So we were sitting around and he was saying, yes, you have to have a raft. That's the only way to build this, you know, with columns going down into the ground, but there should be a raft. And Prabhupada had also told us, I want you to build this temple out of brick, and you should manufacture the brick locally on site. And local people, they can make the bricks, and the walls, he gave a specific dimension. He said the walls should be between 2 and 3 feet thick, you know. So we asked the engineer, how thick should the brick walls be? So he did some calculation. He said, 2'9". And Prabhupada also gave instructions, but he wanted a dome. He did say that. And he had a particular idea how he wanted a cross beams and then another, like an umbrella, a vertical to support. That was his idea. And a lot of other things. He spoke about Krishna's palaces, as described in the Bhagavatam, the opulence of Krishna's palaces. He wanted something beautiful and opulent.
One day his servant wasn't back yet on time from shopping. So because I'd been observing it and I had that desire, I already had that desire. I want to be Prabhupada's body servant in my next life. And I'm looking at the other servants and I'm thinking, I want to do that in my next birth. So Prabhupada rang the bell, but there was no one around. There was the sannyasi room next to Prabhupada's quarters, but there was no one there. So I went in with all the things that I'd seen the servant giving Prabhupada. And I stood there at the back of the room, you know, I wasn't being forward. I was standing there with the garland and the chandan, and Prabhupada indicated I could bring the garland sideboard and put it on him. And then I had the chandan, and I didn't know if it was okay for me to put it on him, but he kind of went like that with his head. So I went forward and I put the chandan on Prabhupada's beautiful forehead. So, you know, they're little things, but they're huge in your spiritual development, because, you know, and again, that experience of being received by Prabhupada and your service being allowed. And of course, so many people have, you know, created so many rules about what's appropriate for ladies to do and not do. But we were his daughters, and he just, you know, we weren't being pushy. We weren't thinking, I'm a woman and I'm going to do it anyway. We just, you know, it was part of the development that to observe what Prabhupada liked and what he wanted. And he allowed it and invited it.
I got to put 3 garlands on Prabhupada, and I have forgotten the circumstances of 2 of them. But I know that Sarvamangala, my friend, was always helping me, pushing me forward, encouraging me to do service, so she got me to do that. So I'm waiting in what the kids later called the round circle, which is a different entrance to the temple room at Bhaktivedanta Manor, for Prabhupada to leave, and there's a few of us there, and the car's there. And finally Prabhupada came down the stairs, and when he went through, he had to walk through the temple room, you know, and what I remember from him coming through the temple room was that there was a guest there, a man, who did his obeisances to Prabhupada, but he did them with his feet towards the deities. He was like doing it in front of Prabhupada, and when afterwards Prabhupada said to Mukunda, who's now Mukunda Maharaj, he said, "You should instruct." So Prabhupada always wanted a standard to be kept, and he wanted the devotees to be able to train the guests, and that was a very important thing. So then when he came out, I thought how kind it was of him to step forward towards me, because I was like standing with this garland, and I thought how kind is. I thought, what will I do now? Like, I didn't feel very worthy to be doing this service, So he walked towards me and put his head down, and his head, I don't want to sound too lyrical, but his head did give me the impression of being like a lotus bud, and I hope that doesn't sound too corny. I just carry on with the description since I've started it. It was a little bit pointed and smooth, and there were the little hairs that were around the side. They were sort of shining, and it just looks so poetic and beautiful. Everything that Prabhupada did was extremely poetic and beautiful, beautifully done without any extraneous movement, and with economy, but just so beautiful, because everything that he did he didn't have any false ego, he didn't have any false identity. Everything was beautiful, so I feel very, very blessed to have had that experience. Another time with a garland at New Mayapur in France, a Krishna Bhamani, who is a lovely, lovely woman. And I consider it to be a great treasure that I have some memories of some god sisters and god brothers or devotees that I can really admire. So she said to me, "Can you make Prabhupada's afternoon garland?" Because she had something else to do. So I said, "Yeah, shall I make it in any particular way?" She said, "No, just put the flowers as you like." And it ended up, when I asked her afterwards if it was okay, she said I had to redo it because it wasn't symmetrical. Now, I didn't know that it had to be symmetrical because she had said, like, do it the way that you like. But even so, just not so long ago, I read this verse in the 11th canto, which said that Krishna is saying to Uddhava that this process is the most perfect because using the impermanent things of the material world, you can attain me, the supreme transcendence. And then he adds a little bit, which is, even if those things are externally useless. I think that's amazing, that externally useless things, or things that are wrong, still by using them, you can attain Krishna. So that's what I remember about that. That I made a garland that wasn't right, but still, I think the service still went to Krishna.
I was living in London, and I had to come in on the train and then walk across the fields. And one morning, I got there, and the kirtan was going already. Prabhupada was on his Vyasasan, another of these big Vyasasans, and the kirtan was going. And that was just such an amazing atmosphere. Oh my gosh. And Prabhupada was so appreciating the dancing. And I do remember, on this occasion, our godbrother Tribhuvanath, who once he got a mridanga around his neck and was singing, he was in another world. And there he was, dancing in front of Prabhupada. And he was just, singing directly to Prabhupada. He had this way of singing, his head going up and down. And Prabhupada was just gazing with laughter and joy into Tribhuvanath's eyes. It was this wonderful connection. And we all knew. There were certain of his devotees that really drew his special affection. In fact, that summer, we were sitting on the lawn. Prabhupada used to sit on the lawn, and on that occasion he had Shrita Kirti was his servant, reading from the Chaitanya Charitamrita. The full versions were not published, but there was a preliminary chapter, I think, just one sample chapter. The Lord in 5 Features, it was called. And so he was reading from that. The Prabhupada was listening. And then one of the devotees there, Yogeshwara, who's from New York, he put his hand up and he said, "Prabhupada," the text had just said something about Lord Chaitanya's mercy being causeless. And he said, "Prabhupada, we know that Lord Chaitanya's mercy is causeless, but still, is there some reason why we've got it, this causeless mercy, we have received this?" And who gets to receive it if it's causeless? And Prabhupada said, simply Krishna likes you. Yeah. Krishna likes you, so you've got the special mercy. And if Krishna does not like you, yeah, he said that.
So while president in Montreal, I think it was 1971, Srila Prabhupada was in Boston, and we decided to join in with what was going to be quite a big initiation ceremony. There was an opportunity for these devotees to get initiated by Srila Prabhupada. So taking them down there, we had to go through quite a minor border because we had a devotee with us who was draft dodging, and we wanted to get him through a small border point so they wouldn't investigate him, and then he could come back in to rejoin Montreal Temple. So, but this didn't happen. He was detected at the border, and he was going to have to stay in the States and appear before draft boards or whatever happens. So he was going to make his own way down to Boston because he got detained at the border there, which he did. But we had a slightly empty car, so which meant that after the greeting of Srila Prabhupada at Logan Airport, I had some space in the car. So I was able to give Karanda a lift back to the temple because more transport was needed. And on the way back, I was talking to him and saying, it's very difficult for us to, from Montreal, we feel a bit up in the sticks there, and it's hard for us to get association. What's the trick? To be there with Prabhupada in a smaller number, to have darshan. What's the trick? So he said, early morning, that's what you want to do. I'll call you. So the next morning, Karanda woke me up early, and we got into Srila Prabhupada's room while Prabhupada was already up. He'd been translating, and we spent 20 minutes, half an hour with Srila Prabhupada. So this was a bit of a revelation for me, and in fact it led to a poem which I wrote a lot later. I'll read that now if I may. How to gain audience in Boston, Mass. In quiet pre-dawn corridors, air damp and odorous, a sandalwood aftermath strayed in tomorrow like a well-liked shawl, aired and cared for. I asked how, and got favour from a new-found friend. Karanda cares enough to wake me, creeping to shower, we two only now at your feet form a triad. Your cabal of heartfulness, alert for the birth, for the show of your truth words. A day marked North Beacon, spring 74. We asked, and you said. We listened and wanted to remember the most of it always. Of what to say to those who claim that all mere words are merely words. So, why do you speak? Why strive to ardently argue and state the point? Being that if words have no point, why do you make points by speaking at all? The most of it always eludes me, but feelings are clear as Indian bell. My consciousness stood to attention in that pared down domain of focus. Chill morning senses were turning nowhere.
Yeah, well, during that first year, when Prabhupada was lecturing, we got to ask questions. So one time I was sitting quite close. At the end, I asked, I said, and I had just received my second initiation. I said, Prabhupada, is it true that when we receive initiation, that our karma is completely taken away? And Prabhupada immediately said, yes, but you must be ruled by your guru. Then there is no karma. my heart started to beat, you know. I thought, ooh, okay. Because, you know, when he was up high above me, the Vyasan was like another of Narayan's creations. He built this Vyasasan for Trafalgar Square because we were hoping that Prabhupada would be with us for Rath Yatra, but in fact he came late for Rath Yatra. So this Vyasasan filled the whole back of the temple room. It was enormous, and I knew it was too big. As soon as Prabhupada, he stepped into the room, he saw it, he said, "It is too big." I thought Narayan was right there, and I thought, there, you see? So Prabhupada was very high on the Vyasasan, and I was, you know, sitting on the floor. So when he said, "You must be ruled by the Guru," he was looking down at me, you know, "You must be ruled by the Guru." So I've never forgotten that. I suppose it's a lifelong journey, lifelong work to really embrace that. Not in a disciplinarian way, but actually it should be really based on love. Yeah.
At one point, the unmarried girls had to leave Bombay, and it wasn't very ceremoniously done. And I was gutted, you know, because I looked after the deities, I dressed the deities, and it was such a difficult thing to have to leave those deities. And we had been told to go to England and collect for the new project, and that in the future there would be an altar where the ladies were serving the deities again. But I was a little skeptical because I was thinking, well, we have to get out now. I don't know what the odds are that we'll be allowed back to serve the deities in the future. So I went to Vrindavan because Srila Prabhupada was there. And when I got there, after a few days, Akshayananda Maharaj was the temple president at the time, and somehow he knew that I could type. And maybe he asked me, and so I got to be his secretary for a very short time. So that meant I got a special room with a tap, which was, in those days in Vrindavan, was something. But then I realized that my room overlooked Prabhupada's quarters, his upstairs quarters where he slept. And somehow, even though I'd had to leave Mumbai, I could still see Prabhupada, unbeknownst to his servants and the men that were serving him and everything. But I could peep out and see Prabhupada at night. And my godsister Vishvadevi, who I'd been in Bombay with, at night we'd put the light off in my room, and we could peep out through the balustrade and we could see Prabhupada. And Prabhupada wasn't very well then, so we could see him, we could see how he was, you know. We could see Tamal Krishna Maharaj going out in the night to see how Prabhupada was. We could see one of his other servants, Upendra Prabhu. We could see them caring for him, but they couldn't see us. But somehow Krishna made that arrangement. And so I learned that it's an affair of the heart. And somehow Krishna makes arrangements for all of us to have that intimacy one way or another. And I suppose it might have been naughty in some people's eyes that Prabhupada was in bed and we were girls. But we weren't just girls, we were his daughters and we cared about him. How would you feel if your father was not well and he would? Of course you'd want to see how he was. So it all became, you can't legislate intimacy, I think is what I learned.
in his room at the manor, there was room for quite a number of guests. You could have 30 or 40 comfortably. So sometimes it used to get quite full, and anyone could go in the afternoon. You could just go in and sit. And once or twice, you know, I was there listening to Prabhupada. One time, an Indian Swami, and he was a Mayavadi, for sure, came with one or two of his retinue to see Prabhupada. And I entered, I think, during the proceedings, and I sat down. There were not so many of us there. And so I could see you could sense from the atmosphere that Prabhupada hadn't really connected with this man and didn't particularly want to. So, but he had given a pile of brochures. He'd given to Prabhupada some of his literature. So after he left the room, Prabhupada said to his servant, distribute these. Everyone should have one. Right. So each of us was sitting there with our booklet, and then Prabhupada said, "Now, take the prasadam and give everyone prasadam, and the book can be the plate." So we all ate whatever it was, some sweets probably, or fruit, and the book was our plate. Yeah. Another time in Prabhupada's room, there was quite a crowd of people, and a question was put. And Prabhupada just looked at me and said, "You answer." So I was put on the spot. And I just remember saying, well, there was a couple of things I said. I said, well, this material world is a place of happiness and distress. Immediately Prabhupada said, no, only distress. Which of course has stayed with me, because I am very much the person who wants to see the happiness as well as the distress, but I always remember that Prabhupada told me it's not happiness, it's all distress. And of course at a deeper level I know that's true. But I like to see the positive too. So then anyway, on this same occasion, maybe it was the second question and Prabhupada had me answer again, so I said, when you chant Krishna's names, you approach Krishna. And Prabhupada immediately interrupted and said, no, when you chant Krishna's name, you are with Krishna. So I'm very grateful that Prabhupada, on those two occasions, he gave me some like core corrections, which have stayed with me. Yeah.
Well, at New Mayapur, when Prabhupada came, like anywhere, the normal devotees were instructed to not bother him, let him do his just translating and let him do his things. But we heard that he was coming out for a darshan, and I just lived in this house, which was right next to the spot where Prabhupada sat. And it was a very beautiful experience. And recently, I went back to New Mayapur and saw that spot, And I said, I would like to build a house there and make a plaque, that Prabhupada sat here. And you can read about those. I think he gave 2 darshans at that spot. You read about it in Hari Sori Prabhu's book. Anyway, I knew about one of them. So I went to one of them, and Prabhupada was sitting there. And there were devotees that were sitting behind him, Avyaya and Adi Shekhar and Bhajahari, who passed away not long ago. And you look at those pictures with Prabhupada in the center and them just so close to him and fanning him and stuff, and it was just so intimate and beautiful. There were quite a few devotees there as well. It was outdoors, very nice weather. And it was right next to the garden where the vegetables and flowers were being grown. And we had like a tannoy system, and it hadn't been there that long. And Prabhupada's Krishna meditations tape was playing, across the tannoy. So it was coming across, and Yogeshwara said to Prabhupada, it sounds like your voice is coming from the spiritual world. And this is the one thing I remember that Prabhupada said. He said, that's because it is coming from the spiritual world, and everyone laughed. So that was a very pleasant moment. But then Prabhupada wanted a Bhagavad Gita. And because I just lived next door, I thought, well, shall I want to get a Bhagavad Gita? And I'm thinking, they've all gone, but I have not. I only live here. But I was scared because in case my daughter, who was very little, you know, in case she started to cry if I suddenly jumped up. So I ended up not going. But I still remember that, you know, at least in my heart, I went to get a Bhagavad Gita. Now, I'll just go on to say when Prabhupada left New Mayapur, which was visited in 1976, went twice as far as I know, and for the second one I was there. The first one we were here actually. But he was going and we waited outside the chateau for his departure. And there was all the devotees from Europe were there, and it was a big crowd, and I was there with my daughter. And he appeared then, he came out surrounded by some of his, you know, confidential devotees, managers and so on, who were with him. And I really wanted to see, but I was kind of towards the back and I was holding my daughter. She was about 18 months or something, or 2 something, 18 months, whatever. And I really wanted to see, you know, because it was just so beautiful. And then all of a sudden, the devotees parted. And I could see this, like just the first time I saw Prabhupada, it was like in a frame of a doorway. And I saw him sort of framed by his associates at the top of the stairs at the chateau with the door behind. And it was kind of the same. And I'm thinking, wow, you know, I wonder if this is the last time that I'll see him, which it ended up being. But I was so grateful. And it's also amazing that Krishna would do that. And for somebody, such an insignificant person, all of a sudden everybody moved and I could see. But the Krishna Balaram installation at New Mayapur, which happened that visit, I didn't see anything of that really because, you know, it was so packed. I thought, if my daughter starts crying, I'll never be able to get out. And I was talking about it recently to some devotees and just said, well, what's the difference? You know, either you take care of your child or you sit in the installation. What's the difference? It's all devotional service. It's all, you know, part of the same family.
And then I thought, now's my chance. I was just alone with Prabhupada. I have some questions. It was on my mind a lot at that time. You know, I had this preaching centre in North London, but I also felt a real pull to go back to Manchester where I had run a temple before. And I was not sure. So I said, Prabhupada, in Krishna's service, when there is a choice of 2 different things, how do we choose? Prabhupada immediately said, choice? You have no choice. You do what Krishna gives you. And so there I was in Prabhupada's room, he told me this. And he was getting ready to go out. And I was just sitting there. Prabhupada was, he called his servant, he got him putting on his chadar and so on, moving towards the door. And I said, Prabhupada, I'd heard that Prabhupada had written about in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, I think it was, he'd written about something called Prabhu Datadesh, which means the particular place or destination or task that has been given to you, Prabhu Datadesh, what your master gives you. Desh actually means land, but the instruction you have been given, and I knew that Prabhupada had given some people very specific instructions. Do this or do that. So I said, Prabhupada, do you have a special instruction for me? And Prabhupada looked at me and he just went, somehow or other, preach. That is all. Somehow or other, preach. So I carry that also with me all my life, really. Somehow or another. And Krishna may give me, it's up to Krishna, the circumstance, the setting, but I know what the task is to somehow or other share, you know, this amazing gift. Yeah.
Well, Prabhupada was so humorous, which was wonderful, but also his sobriety. When he used to sit down to have his meal, I only served him his breakfast. but he sat down so simply at this little chowky in his bedroom, right against the wall, and just so sober and so honoring, just really demonstrating how you honor prasadam, and not talking to anybody, and just, you know, taking a little of this, taking a little of that. It was like so meditative, and you know, there's only that one time I think he called me. It was so beautiful to see. I always think Prabhupada was like poetry in motion. Everything he did was just like in the spiritual world, every step's a dance. The way he moved, and he was always demonstrating complete presence to Krishna. Whatever he was doing, everything he did was beautiful, as if it was an act of love. And I think that's really what's impacted me the most. Apart from his absolute mercifulness and kindness and engaging us, but he was like a living example of how it must be to be in the spiritual world. I guess we all have our natures, and you know, just being allowed to go in the deity room, and how Prabhupada gave us that opportunity, you know, to serve the deities, and how it's not just you have to have your Brahmin initiation. And now I hear there's quite a lot of conjecture about, you know, ladies, if they should be Brahmins or do, you know, a lot of things. But to me, it's just another example of Prabhupada. He wasn't putting the emphasis on you being a Brahmin, I don't think. He was giving you an experience. And we learnt everything experientially from Prabhupada. He gave you a service so you could engage. It wasn't just about what you did. He engaged you, and you got that sense of what it was like to be a servant of Krishna and to be in the association with Krishna. So in the deity room, it wasn't all about what I did. I dressed the deities. You got to see the most beautiful personality. You got to smell all these. Well, you offered beautiful smelling things to Prabhupada. It wasn't that you were smelling them, but you were giving that smell to Krishna, and Prabhupada was giving us that opportunity. And it's important if you have a nature like that you get to dovetail all the beautiful things that you can to the Lord. So that was the experience of being in the deity room and having your Gayatri mantra that Prabhupada gave us. It wasn't a status thing. It wasn't, you know, something about you. It was an opportunity to get a glimpse of the spiritual world and how all the things that Krishna is offered, and how to use all your senses and purify them in offering those things to Krishna. And that is just like such an amazing thing Prabhupada did, giving everyone the opportunity to serve the deities and, you know, to be engaged in Krishna consciousness. And it was groundbreaking what Prabhupada did. And he was fearless. He did that for us. You know, he went against all the kind of niyamagraha kind of things. and he just gave us a chance to come into intimacy with Krishna as well as with him. And when I was at a berry place, when we heard that Prabhupada had left the planet, I had just left Vrindavan 6 days previously, and I was hoping to go back again. And then we heard that Prabhupada had left, and I was just on my way to take Krishna's offering to him. And you know, we were trained up to never be familiar with the deity. It was always awe and reverence. And that principle of we serve in the mood of Lakshmi Narayan, not sentimentally. And Prabhupada taught us everything. But that day when I went in the deity room, And I heard Ranchor singing Yaya Nila Premadana for the very first time for Prabhupada. I just put my head on Nandanishwara's feet and prayed, please don't let it, please Krishna, please don't let me ever forget Srila Prabhupada. So, you know, it's very intimate what Prabhupada gave us.
This links in with like the outstanding quality that of Prabhupada that for me is very prominent. And what was happening was he was giving a class at the manor, and where the Gurukula office is and the washing up place, where those places are now, there was kind of an open space with sinks. We used to make garlands there. A Mandakini, and another god sister who's an angel, she said, when she saw the flowers that we had, she said, just see what beautiful flowers Krishna has provided for his beloved. I mean, that's where she was thinking then, even in those days. So Prabhupada attracted beings that were full of devotion. So I knew there were lots and lots of petals, you know, in there that were actually left over. And I wanted to do something for Prabhupada. He was giving the class, and his shoes were outside the temple room. And so I got some of these petals, you know, quite a lot of them, and I made like a little cushion of petals, and I put his shoes on top. And I thought, you know, I can't get near to him, but he'll know that, you know, someone has put these flowers here for him. It was all nice, you know, so I was waiting for him to come out, and then the class finished, and all of a sudden everyone started moving. And there were devotees walking backwards. They were fanning him and taking pictures, and everyone's going, Jai, Prabhupada. And I love that when you hear a class and at the end everyone shouts Jai. You know, it's just so, it's a celebration of the wonderful experience of listening to Prabhupada, being with him, being part of his movement. So anyway, he's walking towards the door, and one of the devotees who was walking backwards actually messed up the whole thing. And I thought, well, again, you know, like, the intention was there, you know, so I'm sure some prophet was there in doing it. And I ran up the back stairs and threw myself, Prabhupada's already going up the stairs, and I threw myself on the floor doing my obeisances on that little landing. And Sarvamangala said, as he walked past, and Sarvamangala said he smiled. But that's in connection with the quality of Prabhupada, which I like very much, which is his majesty. He was so majestic. Not at all proud, extremely self-sufficient and so bold and confident. He wasn't here to mess around, you know, he was here to spread the name of Krishna, to open the door to let us out of this material world, and anybody who wanted could come along. He was like a king, but there was no pride in him, and I liked that very much, the boldness of him. And when I saw him, getting up to go from his class, it was like the planets were moving. It was like the sun and the planets were moving. It was sort of like, it was like cosmic, because it was so important. Everything that he did was so important.
As a person that I have encountered, I would say the quality which I learnt to look for and to be aware of and to be wary of was the fact that he could see through you. He could tell beyond words, or your even expression in words, of what lay behind and lay beyond your immediate surface demeanor. And so everything from that point onwards was significant, and you were alert to, and it woke you up from the slumber of Kali's soft bed.
But on Janmashtami Day itself, Prabhupada was staying at the manor. He wanted to see Radha Landaneshwara. And that was my temple. I was based in central London. I was the president at the time of the London temple. So we heard Prabhupada's coming to see Radha and Krishna. So you know, me being the responsible person, I sort of was busy organising so many things, and I know everyone wanted to be out there seeing Prabhupada and greeting him and coming. So I thought, well, I'll do the arti because nobody else is going to want to do that. Somebody's got to do, you know, we'll have a special arti. Well, when Prabhupada comes in, I had it all set up. You know, somebody will blow the conch shell, or probably I would blow the conch shell behind the curtain, where, you know, somebody would tell me he's here now. So I blew the, and I started, and I opened the curtain, and we had, in the temple, we had built a platform in the middle of the room, because Prabhupada was being carried, you know, by 4 people. We made a palanquin for him. It was a chair with rods, and so I thought they'll bring it in, they'll put it on the platform, and he can have darshan. So I opened the curtain, and I didn't look. I just started doing the arti. I was looking at Krishna, and when it came, you know, when you offer arti, and there comes a point where you're going to offer to the picture of Prabhupada, of the Guru, and I knew Prabhupada was there, so I turned, expecting him to be halfway back down the temple room, but he wasn't. He was right there. I mean, you know, I could reach out and touch him, and so I offered him, you know, the incense. It was a very special moment. He looked into my eyes. I couldn't avoid his eyes. And he went like that. He was weeping. He was just weeping. And just weeping and kind of half smiling, looking into my eyes. And that was my farewell.
Jai Anilo Prema Dana